I stood by the kitchen counter, the rhythmic hum of the refrigerator the only sound in the otherwise still apartment. It had been a long day, one of those exhausting ones where every movement felt like a struggle, where my body no longer seemed to belong to me, but to something heavier, something more demanding. 9 months pregnant, feeling every shift and turn of the baby inside me. Yet, despite the aches, I still tried to maintain some semblance of normalcy. Dinner was nearly done, and my husband was due home any moment. I heard the sound of the door creaking open, followed by his voice, warm and familiar, calling out from the hallway. "I'm home," he said, and a small smile tugged at the corners of my lips as I turned toward him. But something wasn't right. The way he said it, it was too casual. There was an undertone to his voice, a note of unease that I hadn't heard before. I tried to brush it off as nothing, but my mind kept circling back to that strange hesitation. I wasn't the kind of person to jump to conclusions, but tonight, something felt off. The way he walked through the door was too stiff, his jacket hanging differently from the usual way he carried it. My heart gave a strange, quick thud in my chest, a flutter of anxiety I couldn't shake. He was hiding something. I turned back to the stove, trying to focus on stirring the food, but I couldn't shake the sensation gnawing at me. I glanced over my shoulder as he hung up his coat and started to walk toward me. He was smiling, but it didn't quite reach his eyes. That smile, it felt like it had been practiced. "Everything okay?" I asked, keeping my voice neutral, trying to sound like I hadn't noticed. "Yeah, just long day at work," he muttered, running a hand through his hair. But there was something in his eyes now, something that screamed of avoidance. My pulse quickened. I didn't know what had triggered it, but my instincts told me to pay attention. I stood there for a moment, watching him as he fidgeted near the door, not even looking at me, his eyes fixed on anything but me. Then, just as I turned back to the food, I heard it, a faint noise, a soft crinkling sound from his pocket. I froze. That sound. It was unmistakable. A message. The screen had lit up in his pocket. I could feel my stomach churn with dread. The knife in my hand seemed to grow heavier, and my fingers tightened around it. I had tried to ignore the little signs, small details that didn't add up, late nights, sudden business trips, but this was too much. I couldn't pretend anymore. "I don't feel well," I said, keeping my voice steady, though my heart was pounding now. "I think I'll sit down for a bit." I started walking toward the living room, but he didn't follow immediately. I could feel his eyes on me, but I didn't dare look back. I needed space. My breath came in short bursts, each one a reminder of how much my body had been through, how much I had sacrificed for us, for this family. And yet, in this moment, it was all slipping away. Finally, he followed, and when I sat down, he did too, sitting beside me. But there was no comfort in his presence now. Not anymore. "Is there something you're not telling me?" I asked, my voice shaking despite my efforts to remain calm. I could feel his tension, his nervous energy radiating off him in waves. He blinked, his lips parting as though he might say something, but then he closed them again. He looked down at his hands, his fingers twitching slightly, and that was when I saw it. His phone, which he had left on the kitchen counter, buzzed again. I knew then. I couldn't deny it. I had to face it. This wasn't the man I thought I knew. This wasn't the man I had trusted. I stood up abruptly, my legs shaking under me. "Who is she?" I whispered, the words tasting bitter on my tongue. He flinched, and it was all the confirmation I needed. The way his face paled, the way he refused to meet my eyes. I didn't need him to say a word. His silence screamed the truth. I could feel the anger rising in me, hot and suffocating. But beneath that was something else, something much deeper, a crushing, unbearable sadness. I wanted to scream, to hit him, to demand answers. But all I could do was stand there, my mind racing, trying to process everything. How he had lied to me, how he had betrayed me in the worst possible way, while I was carrying his child. And then, finally, I spoke the words that would change everything. "I want a divorce." The silence that followed was deafening. He didn't argue, didn't beg me to stay. He just stared at me, eyes wide with shock, as if he had never expected me to be capable of such a thing. I walked away from him, knowing there was no turning back. I had been waiting for this moment, without even realizing it, and now that it had come, I knew deep down that I would never go back to being the woman I was before. The woman who believed in him, in us. And I didn't care anymore. Not about the house, not about the future we had built together. All I cared about was what was left of me, what was left of my dignity, and the child that I was about to bring into this world. The tears didn't come, not yet, but my heart was already breaking, and I knew it would be a long time before it would ever heal. The first time I saw him, I didn't know. I didn't know what his presence would come to mean in my life, how much he would change me. It was like one of those moments in a dream where you can't tell whether it's fate or just chance. He was standing there, laughing with a group of friends, the kind of laugh that filled up the room and made everyone else smile without even trying. He had that charm about him, the one that seemed effortless, that pulled you in and made you feel like you were the most important person in the world, if only for a moment. We met in college. I was there, still figuring myself out, trying to balance my studies with trying to make friends and carve a space for myself. It wasn't easy for me. I was never the life of the party, never the one who was first to raise my hand in class or start a conversation. I was more of an observer, quietly taking everything in. And I had gotten used to being that way. But then there was him. I first noticed him in the library, of all places. He was reading, but not just any book. He was reading something I had read the week before, something I had become obsessed with. I watched him from across the room, feeling this strange pull that I couldn't explain. When he closed the book, he looked up and caught my gaze. For a split second, I thought about looking away, but something in his eyes made me hesitate. He smiled, a slow, knowing smile that made my heart skip a beat. "You read it too?" he asked, his voice smooth, almost teasing. I could feel the heat rise in my cheeks. "Yeah," I said, surprised at how shaky my voice sounded. I really liked it." "Me too," he replied, setting the book down. "It's rare to find someone who enjoys something like this. Most people think it's boring." "Yeah," I agreed, a little more confidently this time. "But I think there's a lot of depth to it." There was a moment of silence between us, and for a second I wondered if I had said something stupid. But then he leaned in slightly, as though eager to continue the conversation. And just like that, we started talking. The words came easily between us. I couldn't explain why, but it felt like we had known each other for much longer than we had. That day marked the beginning of everything. We started meeting up in the library after classes, sharing books and thoughts. We would talk for hours about everything and nothing, our hopes, our fears, our plans for the future. It was so easy with him, so effortless. And before I knew it, I was looking forward to those moments more than anything else in my day. It wasn't long before we started spending more time together outside of the library. Dinner dates turned into long walks through the park, coffee runs became our routine. We discovered new restaurants and cafes, places that felt like our little hideaways from the rest of the world. Every date was perfect. Every touch of his hand sent electricity through my veins. The first time he kissed me, I felt like I was floating, like the ground had been swept out from under me and I was weightless, suspended in a moment of pure joy. He was my everything. I remember the first time I said, "I love you." It was a simple moment, really. We were sitting on the couch, watching a movie, his arm around my shoulders. I looked up at him and saw the way he was looking at me, like I was the only person in the room. His gaze was soft, warm, full of tenderness. It was the kind of look you only get from someone who sees you for exactly who you are and yet still chooses to love you. "I love you," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. The words felt like they had been sitting on the tip of my tongue for so long, waiting to be released. He smiled, that same smile that had made me fall for him in the first place. "I love you too," he replied, his voice steady and sure. And in that moment, I felt like I had everything, like there was nothing in the world that could tear us apart. We were inseparable, two halves of a whole, destined to be together forever. But the signs, the little things that I had dismissed at first, were already beginning to creep in. I hadn't noticed them then, not in the whirlwind of our love, not in the rush of new emotions and excitement. There were late nights at work that kept him away longer than usual, random trips that he never seemed to fully explain, and moments when he'd get distracted, his mind somewhere far away. But I was blind to it, caught up in the magic of our love. At first, he seemed perfect. I remember the way he would hold me close after a long day, telling me everything would be okay, that we would face whatever came our way together. He was so confident, so sure of us, and I trusted him. I trusted him with everything, my heart, my body, my soul. We made plans. We talked about the future in such vivid detail that it felt like we were already living it. There was talk of a house, of children, of growing old together. We were a team. He was my partner in every sense of the word, and I thought he would be that way forever. But that was before the cracks started to show, before everything began to change, before I was faced with the truth of who he really was. I wish I had seen it then, the signs of what was to come. Maybe I could have prepared myself for it. Maybe I wouldn't have been so blindsided. But I didn't know. I didn't know that the man I had trusted, the man I had given my heart to, was hiding something from me. Something I never could have imagined. At that point, everything was still perfect. The love was fresh, untainted. We were still in the honeymoon phase, where everything felt possible, where nothing could go wrong. We were living in the bubble of our own happiness, blind to the storm that was slowly building on the horizon, and I never could have imagined that it would all come crashing down. But in those early days, all I could see was him. All I could feel was the warmth of his touch, the sincerity in his words. I had no idea that everything I had come to believe in would soon be shattered, that the love I had cherished so deeply would turn into something unrecognizable. In those moments, we were perfect, and I held on to that perfection, clinging to it as if it could never slip away. Something changed after a while. It wasn't something big at first, nothing I could point to and say, "This is where everything started to go wrong." It was more like a slow, creeping unease, an unsettling feeling that I couldn't shake, no matter how much I tried to ignore it. It started with the small things. I could feel it in the air, like the temperature in the room had subtly shifted, and no one had bothered to tell me. He was still the same man who had held me close on lazy Sunday mornings, still the one who had whispered sweet promises in my ear. But now, something felt distant. I remember the first time I noticed it. He came home late from work. It was nothing unusual at first. He often had long days at the office, staying late for meetings or working on projects that demanded his attention. But that night, when he walked through the door, I felt a subtle difference in him. His smile was there, but it didn't quite reach his eyes. There was a tightness around his jaw, as if he was holding something back. His usual warmth seemed muffled, like it was hidden behind a curtain I couldn't see through. "Rough day?" I asked, trying to keep my tone light. He nodded, but his response was shorter than usual. His words clipped. "Yeah, nothing too serious. Just tired." I tried to brush it off, thinking maybe it was nothing, just the stress of work getting to him. But then it happened again the next day. And the next. He started coming home later, staying in the office longer, and his texts became less frequent. At first, I thought I was just being paranoid, or maybe it was just the exhaustion of being pregnant that made me overly sensitive. But it wasn't just that. There were moments when I caught him looking at his phone in a way that made my stomach churn. He would quickly hide the screen when I walked by, as if he didn't want me to see something, and his usual openness, the casual, easy conversations we used to have, had become stilted. The distance between us grew without me fully realizing it, and that distance became a quiet weight pressing down on me. There was a night when I came home early from an appointment, thinking I'd surprise him with dinner. I stepped into our living room, the lights dimmed low, and there he was, sitting on the couch, his phone held close to his chest, his face flushed with a strange, almost guilty look. When he saw me, his expression faltered, and I saw the subtle panic flash in his eyes before he quickly masked it with a smile. "Hey, you're early," he said, getting up too quickly. "I didn't expect you back so soon." I could tell he was caught off guard. His hands were shaky, his movements too quick to be natural. The phone in his hand had a notification that he had just tapped away from, but I had caught a glimpse of the screen. It was a message, and not one that looked like it was from anyone I knew. I didn't say anything right away, didn't push him for an explanation. But later, when he was in the shower, I picked up his phone. My hands were shaking as I unlocked it, my heart pounding in my chest. I told myself I wasn't being crazy, that I was just checking if there was something important, some work-related message I didn't know about. But deep down, I knew I wasn't being honest with myself. I was looking for something, some kind of confirmation that all of my suspicions were just in my head. And then I found it. A string of messages, private and intimate, between him and someone else. I couldn't bring myself to look at it all at once, my stomach twisting in knots as I scrolled through the conversation. It was the kind of thing you never expect to find, the kind of thing you don't ever want to see. The words were flirtatious, playful, but there was an undeniable underlying tone, a tone that made my chest tighten with an emotion I couldn't name. I didn't even finish reading the messages. I couldn't. The act of scrolling through them, seeing the way he had been lying to me, made my world start to crack at the seams. It was like seeing everything I had built with him crumble away, piece by piece. I put the phone down quickly, my hands trembling, and I sat there, breathing hard, trying to push back the tears that threatened to spill. I didn't know how to process what I had just discovered. All I could feel was this heavy, suffocating weight settling in my chest. When he came out of the bathroom, I pretended everything was fine. I smiled, tried to act normal, but inside, I was falling apart. It wasn't just the betrayal of what I had seen, it was the complete and utter confusion. How could he have done this? How could the man I had loved, the man I thought was my partner, be capable of this kind of deception? But I didn't confront him then. I couldn't. Not yet. The shock was too fresh, too overwhelming. I needed to think, to figure out what I was going to do with this new reality. I spent that night tossing and turning, my mind replaying every interaction we'd had, every moment of intimacy, every word he had spoken to me, trying to piece together the truth from the lies. The next few days were a blur. He acted as though nothing had changed, his behavior the same, though I could see the cracks forming in his attempts to hide his guilt. He was distant in ways that were hard to ignore. He would stare at his phone too long, avoid my eyes when I looked at him, and when I asked him about his day, his answers were vague, almost rehearsed. The excuses began piling up. More late nights at work, more sudden trips that he couldn't quite explain. I knew then that my worst fears were becoming a reality, but I couldn't bring myself to confront him. Not yet. I wasn't ready to face what had been unfolding right before my eyes, but I couldn't ignore it any longer. The small signs, the quiet moments of discomfort, the way he had started to pull away, all of it added up, and I could no longer pretend that everything was okay. The truth was right in front of me, but I wasn't sure I was ready to see it for what it really was. I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being led down a path I didn't want to follow, and that, despite my love for him, it might already be too late to turn back. I couldn't keep pretending anymore. The signs were all there, glaring in my face, impossible to ignore. I had spent the past week second-guessing myself, convincing myself I was just being paranoid, that I was imagining things. But the moment I saw him slip out the door late at night, a little too hurried, a little too guilty, I knew it wasn't just my mind playing tricks on me. It was real. It was happening. And the worst part was, I had known. Deep down, I had known for weeks, if not longer. But every time I tried to confront him, something inside me held me back. I was scared. Scared of what the truth might do to us, to me. I was pregnant, my body was changing, and I had given so much of myself to this relationship. But in that moment, when I saw him with her, when I saw the way he smiled at her, the way he touched her, as if I was a memory he had long since forgotten, I understood. I wasn't going to be able to keep pretending any longer. I had been sitting in the living room when I saw the text, the one that pushed me over the edge. I wasn't snooping this time. I wasn't looking for answers. But it came to me, uninvited. The way the light from his phone lit up the room in a faint, guilty glow. It was late, and I had been half asleep, but the moment I saw the notification, my body tensed. His phone had been buzzing more than usual lately, and I had grown accustomed to it, convinced it was just work or some minor distraction. But this time, there was no mistaking the name on the screen. Her name. The woman he had been seeing behind my back. The woman who had taken the place I once held in his heart. The one who had become more important to him than me. My blood ran cold. I didn't even think before I grabbed the phone from his hand, my fingers trembling as I swiped to unlock it. I could see the message clearly, even in the dim light. She was asking when he was coming to see her again, when they could pick up where they left off. The words were sharp, invasive. They cut through the haze of disbelief that had clouded my mind for so long. He had been lying to me, day after day, hiding the truth behind every smile, every kiss, every promise he had ever made. "You've been seeing her," I whispered, my voice hollow, as if the words had been torn from my soul. He froze. The color drained from his face, his hand suddenly still as it hovered mid-air, unsure of where to go or what to do. I looked at him, searching his face for any hint of remorse, for any sign that he felt the gravity of the betrayal. But there was nothing. No regret, no apology, just a mixture of surprise and guilt. He opened his mouth to speak, but the words didn't come. I didn't give him the chance. "I know," I said, my voice steady now, stronger than I thought it would be. "I know what you've been doing. I know about her, and I know that you don't care about me anymore." The silence that followed was suffocating. He stood there, dumbfounded, unable to form the words that would explain himself, and I realized that no explanation could ever be enough. I had spent years giving him everything I had, everything I was, and now, in the blink of an eye, it was all shattered. The illusion of the life we had built together was nothing more than smoke and mirrors, and it was finally unraveling before my eyes. His eyes darted to the floor, his lips trembling as he tried to speak. I didn't mean for it to happen," he stammered, his voice desperate. "It was a mistake. I didn't want to hurt you. I never wanted to hurt you." But I couldn't hear it anymore. The excuses, the lies, the pathetic justifications that had been coming for weeks, that I had been silently waiting for, hoping for something different, something that would explain everything away. But this wasn't about understanding anymore. This wasn't about saving anything. It wasn't about him anymore. "It's too late for that," I said, my words cutting through the thick silence like a blade. "You've already hurt me more than I ever thought possible, and now I'm done." I looked at him one last time, really looked at him, and it was like I was seeing him for the first time. He wasn't the man I had married. He wasn't the man I had loved. He was someone else. Someone who had chosen to destroy everything we had for his own selfish needs. The man I had given everything to had betrayed me in the most painful way possible. I took a deep breath, steadying myself, and turned away from him. There was nothing left to say, nothing left to feel. I had already given him more than enough chances, more than enough love. And now it was time for me to choose myself, time for me to let go. I walked out of the room, my heart heavy, but my mind clearer than it had been in weeks. I had spent so much time wondering if I could save him, if I could make things work. But in that moment, I realized that I couldn't save him. I couldn't save a man who didn't care enough to save himself. I grabbed my purse, grabbed my coat, and I didn't look back. The sound of his voice calling my name, the frantic desperation in his voice didn't stop me. I had made up my mind. I was done. Done with the lies, done with the pain, done with him. I was leaving. And I wasn't coming back. The door slammed behind me as I stepped out into the cold night air, the darkness wrapping around me like a cloak. It was strange how final it all felt, how everything that had seemed so important just days ago now felt irrelevant. The house, the plans, the future we had promised each other, it was all gone. I didn't know where I was going, but for the first time in so long, I felt like I was free. Free from the weight of his betrayal, free from the suffocating grip of a love that had become toxic. It was over. And somehow, I knew deep down that I would be okay. I would heal. I would rebuild. And I would never again let anyone take away my peace like this. This was my turning point. The moment I realized that I was stronger than I ever thought I could be, that I didn't need him, and I wasn't going to let him drag me down anymore. I thought I had made my decision. I had left him behind. The weight of the betrayal had been unbearable, but somehow, as I stepped away, the burden began to lift. I had my moments of doubt, but they didn't last long. I was carrying our child, and I had already made my peace with the fact that I would be doing this on my own. I didn't need him anymore, but life, as it often does, had other plans. It all started when I went into labor earlier than expected. It was a shock, a sudden rush of pain that caught me off guard, that jolted me into a reality I wasn't quite ready for. I wasn't due for another few weeks, and yet here I was, holding on to my breath as the contractions hit harder and faster. It felt like my body was at war with itself. The fear and the excitement twisted together into a raw, emotional mess. But through it all, there was one thing I was sure of. I was going to be okay, and so was the baby. The doctors were calm, collected. They assured me that everything would be fine, that we were both strong enough to handle this. But even in the midst of the chaos and pain, I couldn't shake the thought that I was facing this alone. I hadn't planned for this. I hadn't expected him to leave, to turn his back on us. But the truth was that I didn't need him now. I had my own strength to rely on. And yet, there he was, trying to force his way back into my life. It started with a message. Simple at first. "How are you? Is everything okay?" The kind of message you send when you think you can still fix things, when you want to pretend that nothing has changed. But I had seen the truth, and no amount of "How are you?" would ever erase the damage he had done. I ignored it. I refused to let myself be pulled back into the web of lies and promises that had once seemed so real, so sincere. I wasn't going to let him back in, not after everything that had happened. But he didn't give up. The messages turned into calls. I let them go to voicemail. Every time he called, I felt my heart tighten with a mixture of anger and grief. Part of me wanted to scream at him, to tell him that it was too late, that I had already made my decision. But another part of me, the part that still remembered how much I had loved him, wanted to pick up, to hear his voice, to let him explain. But I couldn't. I couldn't listen to him beg, couldn't hear him apologize when his actions had already spoken louder than any words ever could. Then came the flowers. Beautiful, elaborate arrangements that arrived at my door, followed by more messages. "I'm sorry. I messed up. Please give me a chance." The guilt in his words was palpable, but it didn't move me. His gestures were just that, gestures. Hollow attempts to undo something that couldn't be undone. I had already mourned the loss of the man I thought I knew. I didn't need his flowers or his apologies. I needed something real, and he couldn't give me that anymore. He showed up at the hospital, uninvited, standing outside my room in the hallway like a shadow. I saw him briefly through the glass window, his face pale and drawn, the weight of his guilt pressing down on him. But I didn't flinch. I didn't open the door. I didn't even acknowledge his presence. "Please," he had begged through the door, his voice cracking. "Please, just let me talk to you. I'll do anything to fix this. I need to be there for you, for the baby." But I didn't need him. I didn't need his promises. I had already been through too much. The weight of the past few weeks had been overwhelming enough. I didn't want him in my life anymore, not like this, not as someone who had torn apart everything I had ever trusted. I pressed the button to call the nurse, signaling for him to leave. When the nurse arrived, she gently but firmly told him to go. He didn't fight her, but I could see the pain in his eyes as he walked away. And I felt nothing. No sympathy, no regret. Only a quiet, bitter relief that he was gone. As the days passed, the pain of labor was replaced with a new kind of exhaustion. I was drained, physically and emotionally, but I was also filled with a sense of fierce determination. I was holding my baby now, my beautiful, perfect child, and I wasn't going to let anyone take that away from me. I had no idea what the future would look like, but I knew one thing for sure. I would protect my baby. I would protect myself. I would build a life without him in it. I finally took the step that I had been putting off for far too long. I called an attorney. I had been hesitant at first, unsure of how complicated it would be, unsure of how much my decision to divorce him would impact everything. But I couldn't keep pretending. I couldn't keep living in a world where the man I had loved so deeply continued to have a hold on me, continued to manipulate my emotions. The phone call was brief but decisive. I explained the situation, the pregnancy, the betrayal, the emotional toll it had all taken on me. The attorney assured me that everything could be handled smoothly, that I didn't have to worry. I wasn't alone anymore. I wasn't helpless. The divorce papers were filed not long after. I didn't care about what he would say, about whether or not he would try to change my mind. I knew it was the right decision. Every time I thought about him, about the way he had shattered my trust, I remembered the pain, the betrayal, and I was reminded of why I couldn't go back. I saw him one last time, weeks later, when the divorce was finalized. He came to my apartment, a last-ditch effort to make amends. He looked like a man who had been through hell, his eyes sunken, his face gaunt, like the weight of everything was finally catching up with him. "I'm sorry," he said, his voice low, almost pleading. "I've never felt more ashamed in my life. I know I don't deserve your forgiveness, but I need you to know that I'm sorry. I messed up, and I'll regret it for the rest of my life." I looked at him, and for the first time I felt no anger, no sadness, just a strange, peaceful emptiness. "You can't change what you did," I said, my voice steady, calm. "But I'm done. It's over." I closed the door gently behind him, feeling nothing but a quiet satisfaction. I had done it. I had moved on, and no one, least of all him, could take that from me. I had my baby. I had my future. And for the first time in a long time, I was finally free. The days passed slowly at first, like the world outside had slowed down to match the pace of my thoughts. I had always been someone who could keep busy, distract myself with work, with the endless tasks that came with everyday life. But now, with my baby in my arms, those distractions seemed to lose their meaning. There was so much time to think, to reflect, to face the quiet reality of what had happened. It wasn't just the betrayal. It wasn't just the heartbreak that had left a permanent scar on my soul. It was everything. The years I had spent building a life with him, the trust I had given him, the love I had poured into us, only for it to crumble into nothing. I had always believed that love was enough, that trust was enough, but I had learned the hard way that those things didn't guarantee anything. The man I had thought I knew, the one I had promised to share my life with, had chosen to betray me when I least expected it. And now I was left to pick up the pieces. But there was also the baby, my beautiful, perfect child, the little one who had no idea of the chaos that had come before their arrival. Every time I looked into their innocent eyes, I felt something stir inside me, a deep, protective love that was unlike anything I had ever known. It was as though my heart had been remade, reshaped into something stronger, something more resilient. This little being was everything. They were my reason for moving forward. They were my reason for being stronger than I ever thought I could be. Yet, there were moments, quiet moments, when the house was still and the baby was asleep, that the loneliness would settle in like a heavy fog. It was different now, the way I felt alone. Before, I had the comforting illusion of a shared life, of someone to turn to when things got tough, when I was tired or overwhelmed. But now, the silence in the house was deafening. I was learning how to be alone, how to navigate the world without the man I had once believed would be by my side forever. It wasn't something I had ever prepared for, but it was my reality now. I had always thought of myself as strong, as someone who could weather any storm. But this feeling of solitude, of having my entire world turn upside down, was different. I found myself questioning everything I had ever believed. Was I really as strong as I had thought? Was I really capable of handling this on my own? There were days when the doubt crept in, when I wondered if I had made the right choices, if I had done the right thing by leaving him. I didn't have anyone to turn to, not in the way I needed. My friends, my family, they tried to comfort me, but no one really understood. No one had been through this with me. No one had seen what I had seen, felt what I had felt. It was in these moments of quiet reflection that the grief would hit hardest. The rawness of it all. I had never expected to feel so empty. so torn. The pain wasn't just about him. It was about everything. The years I had wasted, the dreams I had built with him, the future I thought we would share. The weight of the loss of that future sat heavily on my chest, and I couldn't escape it. There were nights when I would cry quietly, holding my baby close, whispering to them that everything would be okay, even though I wasn't sure if it would be. The uncertainty of the future, the unknowns that lay ahead, filled me with a quiet dread that I couldn't shake. And yet, even in the midst of that grief, there was something else, something I didn't expect. It was the spark of strength, the deep-rooted feeling that I was going to be okay, that no matter how much I hurt, I could get through it. There were moments when I would look at my baby, when I would hold them close and feel the warmth of their tiny body against mine, and I knew that I couldn't let the past define me. I couldn't let the betrayal consume me. I couldn't let the emptiness fill me up, because I had something to live for now. I had someone who needed me, someone who loved me unconditionally. And in those moments, the loneliness faded, just a little, replaced by a love that was bigger than anything I had ever known. It wasn't easy. It was messy and complicated and full of moments of doubt and fear. But there were also moments of clarity, of strength, of growth. I was learning to redefine myself, to find out who I was without him. Without the man I had once trusted with my heart. I didn't know what the future would hold, but I knew that I couldn't keep looking back. I couldn't keep asking myself what went wrong or why I had been so blind. I had to look forward, to embrace the life I was building now. I found solace in the little things, in the way my baby's small hand would curl around my finger, in the way they would gaze up at me with wide, innocent eyes, as though I was their whole world. In the quiet moments when the house was still, when I could take a deep breath and remind myself that I was enough, that I didn't need anyone else to complete me. There were days when I would wake up with a sense of hope, with the belief that I could do this, that I could be both mother and everything else I needed to be. I was learning how to take care of myself, to prioritize my own well-being. I was learning how to be my own support system. I was learning that, while the world around me had crumbled, I had the power to rebuild it, piece by piece. But there were also days when I felt small, when the weight of everything would come crashing down. On those days, I would hold my baby close and remind myself that it was okay to feel weak, to feel lost, to feel scared. I didn't have to have all the answers. I didn't have to be perfect. I just had to keep going, one day at a time. I didn't have the man I thought I would. I didn't have the life I thought I would. But I had something else now, a love that was pure, untainted by the betrayals of the past. And that, I realized, was enough. Slowly, bit by bit, I was healing. Slowly, I was finding myself again. And slowly, I was learning to embrace the woman I was becoming. A woman who could stand on her own, who could survive anything, who could protect her baby, and who could find strength in the silence of her own company. I was no longer just a wife, no longer just a partner. I was a mother, and that was more than enough. It had been months since I had seen him. Months since I had made the hardest decision of my life, choosing to leave the man I had once loved, to build a life for myself and my baby. I had been living in the quiet rhythm of my new life, finding strength in the love I had for my child, finding peace in the solitude. And in that peace, I had begun to heal, to rebuild myself. But life, as always, had its way of throwing unexpected twists into our plans. It started with the most ordinary of moments, an afternoon spent in the park, watching my baby laugh as they played with a toy. I had taken to walking outside more often, enjoying the fresh air, feeling the sun on my face as I tried to find balance in my new life. It was a place where I could forget the past, at least for a while. And that was when I saw him. I hadn't expected to feel anything. I had been so focused on moving forward, so focused on finding myself again, that the idea of a new man in my life was the farthest thing from my mind. But when I looked up and saw him, standing there, across the park, smiling at me with a warmth that made my heart skip a beat, I felt something stir inside me. He was older than me, but not in an unsettling way. His face was kind, with laughter lines around his eyes. There was an openness to him, a gentleness that drew me in immediately. And when he approached, When he spoke to me, it was like I had known him for years. He made me feel at ease, made me feel like I could be myself without judgment, without fear. His name was Evan, and in the time that followed, he became my safe space. He didn't rush me, didn't push me to move faster than I was ready. He understood the wounds I carried, understood that I wasn't ready to dive into anything too quickly, but he was patient, and his kindness was something I hadn't realized I needed so desperately. We spent time together, slowly at first, building trust, building a connection that felt right. I was cautious, of course, but I couldn't help the way he made me feel. For the first time in so long, I felt a sense of hope, a sense that maybe, just maybe, I could trust again. Maybe I could build a new life for myself and my child with someone who wasn't broken, who didn't carry the weight of lies and betrayal. And then, just when I thought I had found peace, the past came crashing back into my life. It was a normal evening. The sun was setting, and I was putting the baby to bed when the doorbell rang. I wasn't expecting anyone, and my first thought was that it was just another package delivery. But when I opened the door, there he was. The man who had once been my husband. The man who had broken me. The man I had walked away from. He was standing there in the doorway, looking lost and broken, like he had been searching for something and finally found it. His eyes were full of regret, full of guilt, and I could see the weight of everything he had carried in his posture. But I wasn't the same person who had left him behind months ago. I wasn't the woman who had once trusted him with everything. "You didn't think I'd come back, did you?" His voice was low, hoarse, and for a moment, I thought I saw a flicker of hope in his eyes. I didn't say anything. I didn't need to. I knew what he wanted, and I knew what he had come for. "I want to see my child," he said, his voice trembling slightly. "I know I messed up. I know I don't deserve forgiveness, but I'm here. I'm here to fix things." The words stung like poison, and I felt that familiar weight in my chest. The ache that never truly went away, the remnants of love that had been twisted into something unrecognizable. I had never imagined him coming back, never thought I'd have to face this again. I didn't let him in. I didn't invite him to stay. "You can't just walk back into our lives like nothing happened," I said, my voice steady but firm. "You had your chance, and you threw it away. You chose her over us." He stepped forward, reaching out as if to touch me, to make me feel the sincerity of his words. But I stepped back, holding my ground. "I'm not here for you," he said. "I'm here for our child. I want to make things right. I want to be a father." His words felt empty, hollow, like he was saying what he thought I needed to hear, but the damage had already been done. "You don't get to come back into my life," I said, each word feeling like it was cutting through years of hurt. "And pretend like you can fix everything. You lost that chance the moment you made the choice to betray me, the moment you decided to put someone else before your own family." He took a step back, his face falling into a mask of anger and frustration. "You don't understand," he said, his voice rising. "I never wanted this. I never wanted to hurt you. I was wrong. I admit it. But I'm here now. I want to make up for it. I want to be part of our child's life." I looked at him, really looked at him, and for the first time, I didn't feel any of the anger or bitterness that had once consumed me. Instead, I felt pity. He wasn't the man I had once loved. He was a shadow of that person, trying to grasp at something that was long gone. "You can't just waltz back into our lives," I said, my voice unwavering. "If you want to be part of our child's life, you need to prove it. Not just with words, but with action. And you need to understand something. If you cause any more disruption in our lives, if you hurt me or our baby again, I will make sure you never see your child again." His face twisted with disbelief, like he couldn't fathom the idea of being cut out of our lives completely. But I didn't back down. I had already made the choice to protect my child, to protect us. He had no place here anymore. "You want to see your child? Prove you can be trusted," I said, my voice firm. "But until then, you're not welcome here. And if you don't leave now, if you don't respect that boundary, you'll never see our child again." For a long moment he stood there, his eyes filled with a mixture of anger and realization. But slowly, reluctantly, he turned and walked away, his steps heavy as he retreated into the night. And when the door closed behind him, I felt a sense of finality that I hadn't realized I needed. The past was over. I had made my choice. I had drawn my line in the sand. And for the first time in so long, I felt truly free. The days after the confrontation were filled with an overwhelming mixture of relief and exhaustion. I had done what I needed to do. I had drawn the line, I had faced my past head-on, and I had stood my ground. It wasn't easy, not by any means, but the decision was made, and there was no going back. When the divorce was finalized, I thought that would be the end of it. But of course, it wasn't. He didn't give up that easily. He tried to fight, to manipulate, to get what he wanted. Access to our child. At first, I thought about letting him have some involvement, maybe even letting him try to prove himself as a father. But then I remembered the lies, the betrayal, the way he had hurt me. I couldn't risk letting him hurt our child too. The court case was long and grueling, filled with arguments and back-and-forth legal battles. I had to explain everything, the affair, the deceit, the emotional toll it had taken on me, the way he had failed us. I had to speak the truth, even when it hurt, even when it felt like I was reopening wounds that had only just begun to heal. And he, of course, tried to portray himself as a changed man. He came to court with apologies, with promises, with the same rehearsed lines he had used before. He claimed he wanted to make things right, that he would do anything to be a part of our child's life. But the lies were too deep, the damage too great. The judge saw it clearly. There was no way I was going to let him back into our lives, not without proof, not without consistent action. He didn't get that chance. When the ruling came down, I felt a strange mixture of victory and sorrow. The judge ruled that he would not have visitation rights, at least not without extensive therapy, probation, and proof of his ability to be a stable, trustworthy presence in our child's life. It wasn't what he wanted. It wasn't what I wanted either, but it was the only way. My child's safety, their future, their emotional well-being, they all had to come first. And I couldn't risk my child being exposed to someone who had betrayed me so deeply, someone who had proven time and time again that they couldn't be trusted. He was furious. He stormed out of the courtroom, shouting, pleading, demanding that I give him a chance. But I knew, deep in my heart, that I had done the right thing. I wasn't going to allow his chaos to seep back into our lives, to disrupt the peace we had worked so hard to build. It was over. The moment the gavel came down, I felt like a weight had been lifted from my shoulders. The decision had been made, and it was final. There would be no more calls, no more messages, no more uncertainty. It was done. But life, as always, had a way of moving forward, of shifting into new phases. And as the months passed, I found myself embracing the life I had built without him. My baby grew, as babies do, and I marveled at every milestone. The first smile, the first steps, the first words. It was bittersweet at times. I knew that they would never know the man who had been their father, the man who had given them life, but that didn't matter anymore. They were mine now, and I was going to protect them, love them, and raise them in a way that would make them feel secure and cherished every single day. It was during this time that I truly began to heal. I had given so much of myself to him, to the idea of us, that I had forgotten who I was. I had forgotten what it meant to be strong on my own, to stand independently. But I had found it again, piece by piece. I was learning how to live for myself, how to be the best version of myself, not just for me, but for my child. And then, there was Evan. He had come into my life so quietly, so unexpectedly. At first, I wasn't sure I was ready for another relationship. I had spent so long healing from the wounds of the past that I didn't know if I had room for anything else. But Evan didn't pressure me. He didn't rush me. He was patient, kind, understanding. And slowly, over time, I let myself open up to him. Our connection grew organically, naturally. There was no drama, no rushing, just two people who were ready to build something solid, something real. He wasn't perfect. He didn't have all the answers. But what he had was something I had been searching for: honesty, kindness, respect. He made me laugh, made me feel safe, made me believe in love again. It wasn't long before we were spending more time together, making plans for the future, dreaming about what our life could be. He loved my child, and my child loved him. It was a gentle transition, no pressure, just two people who understood the importance of building trust, building a family. It was everything I had ever wanted, in a way I hadn't expected. And one day, when the time felt right, Evan proposed. It wasn't grand or extravagant. It was quiet, intimate, just the two of us. He simply asked me if I would spend the rest of my life with him. And in that moment, I realized that I didn't need grand gestures or dramatic declarations. All I needed was someone who loved me for who I was, who loved my child as his own, and who wanted to build a future with me without pretense, without fear. I said yes. We got married in a small ceremony, surrounded by close friends and family, a quiet celebration of the life we had built together. My child was by our side, a part of the ceremony, and it felt like the world had finally come full circle. The past was behind me, and the future was ahead. A future filled with love, with joy, and with the promise of a new beginning. In the years that followed, our family grew stronger. My child flourished, growing up surrounded by love and stability, and Evan proved to be the kind of father that I had always hoped for. He was present, kind, and patient. Together, we built a life that was filled with laughter, with shared dreams, with quiet moments of contentment. I knew then that I had made the right choice. I had taken the hard road, the one that required strength and sacrifice, but in the end, it had led me to something beautiful. The man who had betrayed me was gone from our lives. His absence no longer left a hole in my heart. Instead, there was only room for the love I had for my child, for the love I shared with Evan, and for the love I had learned to give myself. And as I looked at my family, I knew that I was exactly where I was meant to be. It was a quiet afternoon when I decided to take a break from the busyness of life and head to my favorite cafe. The world outside had grown soft with the gentle hum of traffic and distant conversations, but in here, everything felt peaceful. The clinking of cups, the soft jazz playing in the background, the aroma of coffee filling the air. It was a small slice of normalcy in the life I had fought so hard to rebuild. My baby was at home, now a child full of laughter and curiosity, growing up in the warmth of a new family. My life had taken such a different turn than I ever imagined when I had walked away from him. But as time went on, I realized that the pain had finally faded. It was still there in the back of my mind, occasionally resurfacing in quiet moments, but it no longer controlled me. My heart had been broken, but it had healed stronger, more capable of handling whatever came next. I had met someone new, someone who had proven to be everything I needed, gentle, patient, kind. He wasn't perfect, but he was the perfect match for me. And in the quiet moments with him, I had found the peace I had been searching for. Evan was a man who loved me, loved my child, and gave us both the stability we had longed for. I knew then that life had a way of moving forward, of bringing new things into the world, even when it seemed like everything had fallen apart. But that day, sitting at the cafe with my coffee in hand, I felt like the last chapter of my story was about to be written in a way I never expected. She appeared out of nowhere, an older woman, dressed in a simple but elegant coat. She looked out of place, as if she had walked into the cafe with a purpose, but not one that she was entirely ready to reveal. She walked up to me, her eyes scanning me with a mix of curiosity and caution. At first, I didn't think much of it. Maybe she was just someone who had mistaken me for someone else. But when she stood before me, her expression softened, and there was a strange hesitation in her voice as she spoke. "Excuse me," she said, her tone quiet but insistent. Are you the woman who was married to him?" I blinked in surprise, the blood in my veins momentarily freezing. Him, the one who had caused me so much pain, the one whose name I had almost forgotten. The memories of him hit me like a sudden wave, but I forced myself to stay calm, to not let the shock of it overwhelm me. "Who?" I asked, my voice a little shaky, unsure of where this conversation was going. Her eyes narrowed slightly, as if she were looking at someone she recognized but didn't know whether to approach. Then she sighed, almost as if resigning herself to something long awaited. "Your ex-husband," she said, and her words hit me like a punch to the gut. I don't know how to say this, but I owe it to you to tell you the truth. I was with him too. He did the same to me." I froze. The world around me seemed to pause, and I found it hard to breathe. She continued, her voice quieter now, almost like a confession, but not one she wanted to make. "He left me in debt, stole from me. I didn't know it at first, but he was a fraud. And now he's in prison. He got caught for embezzlement, for all the things he did to me, and to you, I'm sure. He's paying for it now. He's paying for everything he did." For a moment, everything went still. Her words felt surreal, like something I couldn't fully comprehend. All the anger, all the hurt I had felt towards him, it hadn't disappeared. But hearing her story, made it clearer. He had been a liar, a thief, and in the end, it wasn't just me he had hurt. It was everyone. "You too?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. She nodded. "Yes, he ruined my life in a way I can't even explain. I don't even know how I let myself trust him." Her eyes were glassy, her face worn with the weight of the past. "I just wanted to let you know, in case you didn't know what happened to him after he left you." I didn't know how to respond. Part of me felt vindicated, knowing that justice had found him, that he wasn't going to continue hurting others. But another part of me felt a quiet relief. It wasn't just my story anymore. It wasn't just my pain that had been inflicted upon me. He had done this to others, and in the end, he had paid for it. "I can't believe it," I said softly. I thought it was just me, that he only destroyed my life." She smiled faintly, her expression tinged with bitterness, but also a kind of resignation. "No," she said, her voice firm now. "He did this to everyone. But the important thing is, you're free. You've moved on, and that's something he can never take from you." I nodded, her words sinking deep into my soul. In some ways, I had always wondered if I had been the only one, if I had been too blind, too trusting. But now I knew the truth. He had been a liar, a manipulator, and in the end, he had lost everything. We sat in silence for a while, each of us processing the conversation in our own way. She stood up to leave, her eyes lingering on me for a moment longer. Then, with a final nod, she walked out of the cafe, disappearing into the busy world outside. I sat there for a long time after she left, staring at the empty chair across from me. The weight of everything I had been through, the betrayal, the pain, the rebuilding of my life, all of it seemed to melt away in that moment. He was gone, in more ways than one. And as I sat there, I realized something. He had taken so much from me, years, trust, love, but he had never taken my ability to find peace. I was free, and that was all that mattered. The rest of the afternoon passed in a quiet haze. I finished my coffee, my mind still racing with everything I had just learned. But I felt a sense of finality, a sense that the last chapter had closed. I had moved on, rebuilt my life, and found love again. And that was all I needed. The pain was gone. The past was behind me. My future, full of love and possibilities, was waiting. And for the first time in a long time, I felt truly, deeply happy. This was my happy ending. This was the life I had fought for.